This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Coveil. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I receive pitches all the time for this podcast. Often those pitches are from A-list publishers, A-list PR firms. I respect the hell out of them. They bring great talent to this podcast. They make my life very easy. So when I get pitched that two longtime Amazon employees have got a little book out, figuratively a little, but they've got a little book out about Amazon and their experience there, their decades-long experience there. Guess what? I want to talk to them because I want to know what I can learn from the Amazon experience. I still recall back in the day, it was not fait accompli. It was not a given that Amazon would become Amazon. There's absolutely nobody on the planet that can say in the late 90s, oh yeah, I knew Amazon would become Amazon today. You're lying if you say that. Just not the case. My guest today, Bill Carr, joined Amazon in 1999, spent 15 years at the company. VP of Digital Media, he helped launch the global digital music and video businesses there, including Amazon Music, Prime Video, and Amazon Studios. He had a catbird seat to a lot. I don't know about you, but I love these autopsy conversations. Let me get in and dig behind the scenes. Let me learn something. Let me find something out. Without any further delay, let's jump right into this conversation with Bill Carr, formerly of Amazon, a guy who had a chance to look under the covers and see how it all happened. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Bill Carr. I go back in time, Bill, to 1996. I put a website up in 1996. I actually had some e-commerce going, making significant money to run my life by March of 1997. A few years before you started in Amazon, but a few years after Jeff had started Amazon. And I can think back to that time. It was not preordained. Even on the book side of things, it was not preordained that Amazon was going to be the winner. I remember somebody was letting me sell books off my website. I was getting a piece and they were getting a piece or whatever, and they were fulfilling. This was back when there was multiple book selling competitors. And then Amazon came along and it was much easier. And I remember this guy was so mad. He wanted to sue me. I wanted to go with Amazon and all this. And this was just on books. But why don't we give a really big picture opening salvo here? Maybe we don't get out of this question, and that'd be fine. But my gosh, it sure looks like, in hindsight, that all of corporate America was asleep at the wheel to give Jeff and Amazon the opportunity that they took and ran with.
Yeah, well, Michael, I'm pleased to hear you say that because today, when I encounter people, they think of the Amazon they know today, but they have a hard time remembering, yes, what was life like back in 1997, 1999? We were in a dogfight with barnesandnoble.com. It was far from preordained that Amazon was going to survive and thrive. The starting off point for our book, the setting really begins in 2003. What people don't realize is that if you look at Amazon's financial results in 2003, great news that they had 5.7 billion in sales. It was the fastest company in history to reach $1 billion in sales. But 77% of that revenue was in physical books, CDs, and DVDs.
2003.
Yes, 2003. 77% of the revenue was physical media products. And oh, by the way, the writing was on the wall that the physical media business, the days were numbered. Napster was taking off. Millions of people were file sharing. Apple had already crossed more than 1 million. iPod sales, iTunes was taking off. If you go back to the time to say that Amazon would be the successful company that it is today, that has such diverse businesses from cloud computing to digital devices, a successful digital media business, e-commerce, and third-party logistics, that would have been a pretty big leap.
An incomprehensible leap.
Yeah, eBay, Yahoo, these were companies that had a much larger market cap than Amazon in those days. In 2003, we were just struggling to make a profit. And in fact, we had barely survived the dot-com bust of 2001. But to go back to your statement about other companies were asleep at the switch, I think what you can go back in hindsight and look now to say that if you had thought long-term, which Amazon did, and these other companies had thought more like Amazon, that they would find themselves and Amazon would find themselves in a very different position today.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance if some of the companies that were established took a pivot and took a long-term view and looked at the internet going gangbusters. I still remember how I felt when Netscape and Andreessen went public in the summer of 1995. I was like, this is a game changer. This is going to change everyone's life. Now, I was not in a position to take advantage of it by any stretch like Jeff was, but I still knew. In hindsight also, I realized that many of my peers and other people were not looking at it that way.
No, I don't think they were, or even if they were, what I came to learn over the years that followed during my time at Amazon and elsewhere is that because I worked, many of those companies were my business partners, founded and ran the digital music and digital movie and TV show businesses for Amazon, what are now today known as Amazon Music, Prime Video, and Amazon Studios. Who did I work with? I worked with the record companies. I worked directly with the motion picture studios. At that time, they were in as good or theoretically a better place to capitalize on this shift. But what I came to appreciate is it's very difficult for companies to place their resources and make the right kind of bets to actually win and succeed when these kinds of changes occur. They did make various efforts, but in retrospect, those efforts were much too little or hand waving. They didn't really fully commit themselves to the changes that the internet would bring that Amazon did.
So when you're sitting there and you have all these relationships and knowledge of the playing field, and behind the scenes, Amazon, and you can explain to me some of that thinking behind the scenes, Amazon was clearly saying, we're going to take a bite at everything, or we're going to try to take a bite at everything. It must have been an interesting meeting or initial conversation with some of these established players and established businesses that not too long after 2003, where you're making all your money selling books, these established players must have been shocked that Amazon was pivoting. And perhaps they were shocked, but too late, because then they realized, oh my gosh, Amazon pivoted and we can't do anything. And now they might overtake us.
The period of time for these digital media businesses to incubate actually was quite long. Most people do not remember the names of the predecessors to these. Prime Video today, the first version of that was called Amazon Unbox, which we launched in 2005. And it was a way for people to download movies and TV shows to their PC. It was one of the worst products I've ever built in my career, in my life. And were it not for Amazon's attitude and Jeff's attitude that if you make a terrible mistake, the last thing to do is to fire that leader. It's that they've learned a valuable lesson and to let them learn from that and improve. It took us 5 or 6 years, frankly, before we developed a great digital movie and TV service. Today, it has more than 100 million customers around the world. Those companies had their chance and they had various efforts. The difference was the level of commitment that Amazon made in terms of the kinds of people that they put on the project, the direct involvement that Jeff had in working with leaders like me to make sure that these businesses came to fruition, and the kinds of resources and long-term thinking. Another great example was Amazon Web Services. That whole business was birthed between 2003 and 2005. It was actually a slow process to get started. It was a series of meetings using this peculiar process that we developed at Amazon called the working backwards process, the PRFAQ process, where when you have a new product idea, you start by first writing the press release for the product. And then you work backwards from there to say, now, how could I actually build this product that I've described in this press release? And you answer a lot of those questions in the FAQ section of the document. Jeff actually forced that early AWS team to go through draft after draft, idea after idea. Where Jeff and Amazon maybe differed from the entrenched competition was that they were very patient. An impatient leader would have made the first acquisition that seemed apparent, launched something that was a Me Too product. But Jeff actually focused us, whether it was both the AWS team or the work I was doing in digital media and the device team, focused on how can we invent something new on behalf of the consumer, or in AWS's case, how can we invent something new on behalf of other tech companies like us? That slow, methodical process of starting with what would truly make a difference for that customer and working backwards from there actually took years. But that patience, that long-term orientation has paid off enormously.
You'll have to excuse me for not being prepared to have the chart in front of me, but trying to go back from memory, and you can help fill in the blanks. The Amazon share price went sideways from when to when? I mean, it was a long time. You're talking about patience, and I'm thinking about that share price, and those shareholders had to be patient. So behind the scenes, you guys had to be telling people, sit tight. This is what we're doing. Sit tight, be patient, because that share price did not go up for a very, very long time.
Yeah, it took a long time. I remember well enough because, of course, as a leader there, most of my compensation was tied up in equity. Even today, as I understand it, I departed the company 6 years ago, but I understand that even today that the most senior executive in the Seattle headquarters has a maximum base salary of $165,000 in cash. And then the rest of their compensation is purely in stock. That was the case for me too. It was very painful for me when I joined the company in 1999 with a share price in the 50s or 60s. And then it went all the way down to $5, I believe, in 2001. It did not claw itself back rapidly. I don't have the chart in front of me either, but it took a long time before the Amazon stock rallied. The miraculous thing was that it was in this short little window of time, 2003 to 2005, that all of the businesses that had propelled Amazon's growth were birthed. Amazon Prime, fulfillment by Amazon, the first device in the device business, Kindle, which has led to fabulous devices like the Amazon Echo, AWS, and the digital media businesses that I was running in music and video. Those were all conceived of, and teams were formed and work started in that window of time. Those are the businesses that have now turned this into a $1 trillion company.
You just rattled off a bunch of outcomes, but outcomes, that's what we can all see and we can taste today. But the outcomes were not necessarily planned. I think the more important thing that I want to open up with you is the process, because before you get the outcome, there's a process. And while you rattled off a lot of success stories, I've seen Jeff talk about this. I've seen the shareholder letters. There were a lot of stories that were not successful that people don't hear about today. And that mindset, which is almost kind of a venture capital mindset, we're going to try a lot, we're going to fail a lot, but we're going to get some big winners.
One of the things that defines Amazon is a willingness to invent. Hand in hand with that is a willingness to fail. Because if you don't like the idea of failing, then as a company, you better not try to invent anything, because anyone who has gone out and invented new products and services has learned that they don't all work. When you're working on them before they've launched, you don't know how well it will work or will not work. You have to be willing to fail. We had all kinds of failures. I already started to talk about the first video business that we had called Amazon Unbox. We changed the nature of that product and rebranded it 3 times over the course of 7 years. There were countless setbacks, countless failures, countless challenges along the way. The first service that AWS released, or one of the first services, which at the time Jeff and the team thought would be one of the biggest, is called Mechanical Turk. That service still exists, but it really didn't take off at all. It wasn't until the team focused on services like S3 simple storage and the EC2 compute services that they figured out what kind of services they really needed to build. Yes, the process was all about, again, this process of A, it was a long-term mindset. B, it was a mindset of willingness to invent and fail, and being customer obsessed, starting with the customer. What could we invent on behalf of the customer? As Henry Ford once said, if you ask a customer what they want, In the horse and buggy days, they'll say, I want another horse. I want more horsepower. What they couldn't envision is what they really wanted was a car that was driven by a combustible engine. The same was true when Amazon set out to create the first e-reader with the Amazon Kindle. Nothing like that existed at the time. Through a process, multi-month process of how could we actually make the ebook business come to life? Because it was a moribund business at that time, about figuring out like, well, the device needs to be always connected to the internet. Back in those days, Wi-Fi wasn't prevalent. So how would we get over that problem? It needs to not have a reflective screen. It needs to have paper-like screen. So we sought out and found e-ink technology. It needs to have not just a few thousand books. It needs to have hundreds of thousands of books. It required all kinds of work with publishers to sort of enable that process. I can go on, but the three hallmarks of how Amazon did this from a process point of view was this long-term orientation, this obsession with the customer, starting with the customer, working backwards, and a willingness to invent, and correspondingly a willingness to fail.
I grabbed this one quote from your book reviews, Tim O'Reilly of O'Reilly Media, and I caught this line, which really was an intriguing way he said it about your book. He said, Jeff Bezos once told me that unlike Google or Apple, Amazon doesn't have one big advantage, so we have to braid a rope out of many small advantages. Okay, so take me back in time. Here we are, 95, 96, 97. It's a book business. I can put myself back in that point in time. And the only thing I thought about Amazon were books. That was it. But behind the scenes, the braiding the rope, was that already taking place within Amazon to the investors in the outside world? Or not really the outside world, because the outside world, I don't really think last 5 years of the 90s was thinking about Amazon anything other than books. I guess this is the question. Was it always Jeff's ambition to start with books and then branch out to everything that makes sense? Was that always the vision?
I'll do my best to answer that question. I've learned long ago not to try to speak for Jeff or speak to what's in his mind, but having heard him talk about this from time to time, his original thought was just looking at the growth of the internet, the rapid growth, a report that showed that the rate of commerce on the internet was going to explode. Then he sought to think about, okay, well, what would be the appropriate type of commerce that's going to work on the internet? He wisely landed on the book, and there are lots of good reasons why the book was the right place to start. Number one, it's an item where there are millions of them. Physical stores can't carry all of them. Number two, it's easy to ship. Number three, it's easy to find an electronic catalog of books because there were these distributors, Ingram and Baker and Taylor, that had an electronic catalog that you could easily import to light up your website because your catalog is your store. All these characteristics made the book a great place to start. But in his mind, he was thinking, I want to enable commerce on the web. And so, yes, I think the short answer is he was certainly thinking along the lines of how can we enable, as he said many times in the early years, Amazon should be the place for people to find, discover, and buy anything they want to purchase online. By the time I arrived in 1999, and I was actually working on the physical media business in those days, actually the DVD and VHS business, the primary drive of the company was just to expand into as many product categories as possible, adding sporting goods, adding electronics, adding apparel, on and on and on, toys. That was really the vision, I'd say, from the time that I arrived, 98 through, let's call it 2002, 2003. It's really around that 2002, 2003 that Jeff starts and Amazon start to branch out to do things beyond just retail, where then he thinks about the company being something much more than that. The funny thing was, of course, there were a lot of heated debates inside the company to say, well, why would we do something about web services to third parties? We're an e-commerce company, or we can't make our own device. We're not a device company. That's something that companies like Sony do. We don't do that. We're an e-commerce company. Again, this is where Jeff's orientation to think much longer term and free himself from being a skills forward approach. So most companies in these situations would take a skills forward approach, meaning, okay, we are skilled in e-commerce, so that's what we do, and we're going to keep doing that. If we identify some other business opportunity that doesn't fit within our skill set, like building our own devices, well, we're not going to do that. Instead, what Jeff sought to do is say, I'm going to have a customer-centric approach to say, well, what do customers want? And if what they want is a digital media device that I can read any kind of book that's published and download it in a few seconds in a non-reflective screen, then I need to figure out how to go acquire the team, the skills, and the capabilities to go do that. That same thinking as applied to these other businesses, that's what allowed Amazon to go thrive and now prosper in so many different business units. And it's also what holds a lot of other companies back from why they didn't make the leap over to some of these new businesses that Amazon has tackled.
I'm thinking about myself as kind of a loyal customer. And of course, like most people, at least for those that have been around for a while, I got hooked on books. I got hooked on the service. Many of the things that you're talking about as inventions or new ideas and whatnot, to me, they just always seemed like logical extensions about what I was already doing. I was buying a book from Amazon, so I trusted they could send me a book. Well, guess what? It wasn't really a stretch to trust they could send me underwear. It wasn't really a stretch that, oh, they've got physical books. Well, it's not really a stretch. There's going to be a digital book, and it's not really a stretch that that particular company, Amazon, is going to be involved in digital books. It always seemed like logical extensions. It never really felt innovative to me. And then we look back over 20 years and you're like, wow, look at all that innovation. From a customer standpoint, it always just felt like, well, that's natural. That should be expected. That's what comes next.
Right. And that's the idea that if you've actually put the customer first, you've done that. In the same way that a customer could never say, well, what I really want is a product that it looks like a black Pringles can and sits on my kitchen counter and has a speaker and I talk to it, plays music and tells me the news and plays podcasts and I can order things on it. Customers can't articulate those kinds of needs by starting with the customer and inventing on their behalf. That's the approach that Amazon took that allowed them to build breakthrough products like the Echo and Alexa.
Speaking of Echo and Alexa, and speaking of how you just described that, in many ways could have sounded like Steve Jobs in the original iPod, something like that. The customer can't really imagine it, and we are going to go down that path. Can I guess that some of the tech influences for Amazon before you had been into that business? For example, Apple goes back to the late 70s. So they got this huge experience with stuff. And all of a sudden, Amazon is now a tech company too. What were some of the influences that were driving the influences that we all know and love and use? What was going on behind the scenes in terms of, let's say, an Alexa or an Echo?
Well, behind the scenes, it all started with this seed of this vision of, hey, it's 2003. The world of media is changing. The days of physical media are at some point coming to a close. It's going to be much more convenient that if you want to watch a movie or TV show to select from any of the ones available on the planet. The idea of streaming didn't even exist then, but then be able to just watch it on your TV set on demand. This is coming, or the same for books, or the same for music. That's going to be more convenient for customers. Exactly how this will all work out. What will be the business model? Will it be a subscription? Will it be free with ads? Will it be a la carte? What technologies will be involved? None of these things were known at that time, but we decided to commit ourselves down that path. In doing so, what one always does is, to some degree, you stand on other companies' shoulders. You look at what's working. The devices that inspired us in those early years were the iPod and the BlackBerry. One of the things, for example, we knew about the iPod was that it had a fatal flaw, which was to actually get new music onto your iPod, you had to sideload it. You had to connect it to your computer. By studying sort of the customer and customers' frustration of having stale iPod syndrome, meaning you did the work one time to load 50 songs onto your iPod, but since the average customer only bothered to sideload their iPod once or twice a year, most of the time they kept having to listen to the same damn 50 songs. Wouldn't it be much better if instead it was more like this BlackBerry that I use, where I'm always connected to the internet. I walk around, my email's always coming to me, I can always send it. Why can't my digital media device work like that? That was one of the important features of the Kindle, is that it was always connected to the internet, so you could always access the books. The funny thing is, back in that era, we didn't know in 2003, 2004, we hadn't decided what products we should build, and we spent all kinds of time doing ideation. One of the ideas I remember that Jeff came up with was called the Amazon Puck. The Puck was something that could sit on your countertop, and you could talk to the Puck and say, Puck, order more toilet paper, or order more laundry detergent. Of course, now that you hear that, you can realize that that was a precursor to the idea of the Echo. And in fact, if you ask Jeff, he'll talk about, as a huge Star Trek fan, what really influenced him was that if you watch Star Trek, you know they always say, computer, set a course for SETI Alpha 6, or wherever it is that the Enterprise needed to go. Their interaction with the computer was through the voice. It seemed logical that at some point this interaction model would come true, but we didn't know how or if that would happen.
We're all lucky that Gene Roddenberry did not try to patent or whatnot to tie up all these ideas back in the day, huh?
Right. I mean, so you're asking what went into this? It's influenced by everything. It's influenced by everything from Gene Roddenberry to what products they built RIM to what products Steve Jobs are building. It's sort of this hash and this stew that you would live in to think about all kinds of ideas. And then you would seek to do, it's easier to invent the future than predict it. That's what we would seek to do. And along the way, we had some inventions that didn't work out so well, like the Fire phone, but other inventions like the Echo and Alexa are a huge success.
We've been talking about a lot of success stories, and I don't have the exact timing in my mind, but I'm thinking of another company, a competitor of Amazon's today, especially in the space that you happen to have come from within Amazon, and that's Netflix. To me, okay, so we're talking about Amazon gearing up and getting bigger and whatnot, and of course, Disney and Apple were out there and all the studios were out there. Were there mistakes made inside Amazon that allowed a Netflix to come into be?
First, I'll just say Netflix is a fantastic company who's done a great job of actually doing a lot of what Amazon did. They thought long term. Young people today may not realize that Netflix started off as a service where you rented DVDs and Netflix shipped you DVDs by mail. But Reed Hastings didn't name the company DVD Flix or DVD by mail. He named it Netflix because even in those days when they launched, they were thinking long-term that someday I'll be able to just transmit the movies and TV shows over the internet. This DVD is just a starting place. There were definitely mistakes made. I can tell you that I personally underestimated Netflix multiple times, just as Amazon was misunderstood or underestimated. A great example of that was in the early days, Netflix, their business model was focused on rental. In the home video, physical DVD home video market in those days, the rental category was a declining category. The ownership or sell-through category was a growing category. That was the category that we competed in. I personally thought, oh, well, this Netflix thing, they're just in the wrong business model. Like why people's demand for rental is declining, sell-through is growing. There's problems with that rental business model. This is the right one. That was an example of, I won't say what Jeff or anyone else thought, but I thought, oh, this is not much of a threat because they're in the wrong category. Then later, when they launched their first streaming offering, and many people will not remember what that was like, it was included for free with your DVD subscription. The selection of movies and TV shows in that service was pretty awful. These were not very popular movies and TV shows. I thought this seemed like a gimmick to me. I remember my evaluation was, why have they done this? It's free with the basic service. The quality of the shows isn't very good. Streaming technology was sort of a nascent technology at that time versus download. It couldn't deliver. Streaming was the providence of YouTube for low resolution, rebuffering cat videos. I completely discounted it. But in retrospect, they actually had a very smart long-term plan, which was that by introducing it for free, no one could complain about the poor quality of these movies and TV shows. It allowed them to learn and improve the technology, which they invested heavily in figuring out how do we build the right technology to stream high quality, DVD quality movies and TV shows to connected TV sets, connected DVD players, computers. They were the first to really focus on that. I'll be candid. I was still focused on the download technology, and I was still focused on the a la carte transactional technology because that frankly was what Amazon had been focused on. It was several years before we pivoted, and frankly, we stood to some degree on Netflix's shoulders by our first offering for Prime Video. The videos were free for Prime subscribers. There was no additional cost. Over time, we, like Netflix, improved the quality of the movies and TV shows. We learned. We were able to start commanding, just as they would, premium just for that service alone, because it stands on its own, just as Netflix stands on its own today. Netflix is a fine company. I deeply respect the way in which they really thought long-term and really started with the customer and worked backwards.
So if I go back a really long time, and this is a little more in your wheelhouse too, Hollywood has its beginnings well over a century ago, and you have such tremendous success in this studio system. And I guess I've heard many people say that the studios were nothing more really than big banks of money that would just make decisions and whatnot, but they've made a lot of money for a very, very, very long time. It's really interesting that the likes of an Amazon or an Apple and a Netflix, given that head start that Hollywood had on content creation, film and TV, all of the brain power that should have been there, all of the access, and to allow the new players to come into be. It's a really interesting autopsy that one can go back and look at, because it just doesn't seem like there's any reason why they would have or could have allowed you all to come into existence. Again, it seems like an asleep at the wheel type thing to me.
Yeah. Why did this happen? It happened because of the much shorter term orientation of studios and the compensation model at studios. Studios are well renowned for having a cash bonus system tied to departmental results for a given year. As soon as you have a system like that, where if you have the different divisions of the studio, the theatrical division, the home video division, the pay TV division, and each one of them are incented to maximize the revenue for their existing division, think about it for that calendar year. And that's how not only the executives of each one of those divisions are paid, but also the CEO. Then their incentive to say, I think that 5 to 10 years from now, one or more of these divisions, the revenue is really going to go away because of this whole digital thing. Let's now create a new division with some of our best people. Let's do some things that are actually going to hurt my revenue for, say, my TV business or my theatrical exhibition business or my home video business, things that will actually cause me to miss my bonus for the next 5 years, in order to have, at the end of that time, this other business could take a decade to nurture before it's really mature and will throw off lots of cash flow and be positive. The whole problem with that is that none of the leadership in the studios at any time had any incentive to do what I just described, because all of their incentives were about, how do I hit my annual bonus? That was the difference. Amazon, we don't have any cash bonuses based on hitting any goals. All of our compensation for everyone in the company was based on the Amazon stock. If Amazon succeeds, we succeed. Jeff and the leadership team all have developed a very long-term mindset, realizing like, yes, this digital business is going to take a long time to develop. And to some degree, it's going to actually cannibalize our physical media business, but better that we cannibalize it than someone else does, is largely a matter of that mindset. And then the last part, as I've already mentioned, is that skills forward approach versus customer forward approach. Another reason why the studios might not have tackled that is because to successfully develop a global business to consumer digital video business, you've had to develop a whole lot of technology and applications that could run on a variety of devices, and a great way to interact with customers, to let them shop and consume, and great CS department. None of these things are things that the studios had the skills to do. But we didn't have the skills to build devices. We've identified a need. How are we going to go solve this? Candidly, the studios did not take that approach. Now they're playing catch up through various acquisitions, through bringing in new leadership, like my former boss and good friend, Jason Kyler, who has such experience. But they had a huge advantage over Amazon and Netflix a decade ago, but they ceded that advantage by not focusing on what they needed to do to win in the business long term.
I don't think we've used this exact phrase so far in this conversation. Of course, it's a part of your work, but the idea of delaying gratification. And I'm curious your perspective as we talk about delaying gratification as one of the secrets to the Amazonian way. Do you feel like this idea of delaying gratification there's a lot of smart people out there that see clearly what Amazon has done now in hindsight, but delaying gratification is not easy. I mean, I can think of so many areas of American society, for example, where delaying gratification is, regardless of Amazon and Jeff's success, delaying gratification for a lot of America is not exactly something that we've flipped the switch to and jumped to exactly as the new way to do things. But speak to the corporate way to do things. How much do you think Amazon has affected other corporations in terms of this delaying gratification? And do you think it's been working so far for them?
I'll first speak to the point, like, yes, it is true that there is significant delayed gratification. One thing that's, at least from the point of view of a leader, an executive working inside Amazon, I can tell you that was apparent to me every single day when I would go meet with my peers at the studios. I'd fly down to Los Angeles, riding in coach, staying at the Hilton. And when they would come up to see me in Seattle, riding in first class and staying at the Four Seasons, that was just one example of the delayed gratification. Or when I'd go meet with them in their offices in Los Angeles and they had a palatial office where they had a budget for designing it. And I had a cubicle with a desk made out of a door and 4x4s and angle brackets. There is no doubt that Amazon's frugality, focus on what's right for the customer versus how do I enrich the lives of my senior leaders, is a huge form of that. And I'm here to tell you that that was oftentimes very hard. Yes, there was significant delayed gratification as a result of that. To what degree other companies have taken this up, that's really hard for me to say. I think that one of the reasons why my co-author Colin and I sought to write a book about Amazon is to help, because I don't think most of the world actually understands how Amazon has done this. And they don't understand sort of the kinds of long-term thinking and sacrifices they had to make. Our hope is that by sharing how did they do it and what were the processes and practices and thinking that led to this, that more companies would take an approach of delayed gratification and long-term thinking, because I think it's better for customers, more satisfying for people inside companies long-term.
We take apart all these, and look, you go into so much more detail in your book. We're just kind of doing these steps, all these things that had to take place, the delayed gratification, clearly not an overnight success story, a long time in the making. But now here we are in 2021, we're talking the biggest of the big dogs almost. I mean, this is success that's unimaginable. I mean, I think anybody with an honest bone in their body wants to say negative things about Amazon, given over many of the issues that you and I have been talking about. It's kind of just hating on or jealousy, because when you do the autopsy and you look back, you can see all the steps that take place, all the decisions, all the risks that were taken, etc. And it's just an amazing story. But here we are now at this point of largesse and massive success. Does Amazon ever get to the point where it's too big? Is it too big? For example, future competition. Is Amazon's model so good, the executive thinking been so good, that future competition that might want to come in, how do they compete with an Amazon?
This is obviously a big and important question. The traditional ways that we have looked at corporate power and the issues of antitrust issues, there's no doubt that there's a whole new conversation going on. I certainly cannot profess to be a subject matter expert in this conversation about, is it a problem with Facebook being too big and Google being too big and Amazon, et cetera, et cetera.
Apple, Netflix, et cetera.
Apple, Netflix, yeah. Look, there is no doubt that globalization and the internet changes the nature of the breadth and reach that a company can have now. In traditional retail, even Walmart, the largest retailer in the world, was largely a US-based company, and their breadth and reach was limited by where they could open stores, the square footage of each one of those stores. And obviously the internet has no bounds like this. The only bounds are Amazon's ability to place fulfillment centers in these locations around the world, and they're ever growing. There are even fewer constraints on products like Amazon Web Services that can be global. What does this mean for business? What does this mean for innovation, for customers, for technology? That's hard to say. Obviously, Amazon has made an amazing service. You can get almost anything from Amazon. You can get it fast. You can get it at low prices. Who doesn't like that?
My question was not a critical one in the sense that everything you deliver, everything that Amazon delivers. I mean, when I buy stuff on Amazon, what am I? I'm not complaining. It gets delivered on time. Quality's good. I'm happy. But I just wonder, when you look at this big picture wise, and I see this, but anyone that wants to say, oh my gosh, Jeff's the richest guy in the world. I mean, he's a bad guy. He bought the Washington Post, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking to myself, hold on. What were you doing in 1995? He took the swings. It worked. But the question then becomes, at some point in time, I can't imagine the pressure he must feel. It's an interesting thing to unpack in the sense that once you get past all this great story of all these great moves, these decisions, et cetera, and then you get to immense success, then what? Then what for the rest of society? It's an interesting conundrum, huh?
Yeah, I think the reason why this is a hard question for me to answer is a hard question for anyone to answer, because it's new territory. We haven't had a period in corporate history where we have a handful of companies that are global powerhouses. It hasn't happened before. What does it mean? What happens next? I really don't know. The only thing that I'm sure of is that technology is going to continue to move apace. There will be disruptions. Will the disruptors be new startups that we haven't heard of? Will all disruptions just occur organically from within these large companies? It's really hard for me to say.
One of the things you do a great job in your book, though, is the many things that we're talking now beyond my final last little controversial question there. But the things that you talk about in your book and the things we've been talking about in this conversation, how do you take this mindset and apply it to your own life, your own business, et cetera? And I think that's the real point. Without trying to take you down a bullet point reciting of your book, people are going to have to check that out. But I hope they can see there's a thinking here, there's a process, there's a mentality. And that's the most important thing if you ultimately want to try to take your stab at being the next Amazon or competing with Amazon, et cetera. There is a way to think, and you've got to really understand how the big dog got there.
Yeah, frankly, actually, to pivot off of your last question, that's why Colin and I wrote this book, because we want to pass this on to the next generation of business leaders, to the next person who has an idea they're going to start in their basement or their garage, and to say, look, there are things you can learn from Amazon to just learn how they do it, and you can apply it. It doesn't matter how big your business is or whether it's a B2B business or B2C or tech or non-tech, because Amazon has this diversity of businesses that really only have one thing in common, which are a mindset and a set of scalable, repeatable processes that they use for each one of them. The mindset is something that I've talked about earlier in this talk, which really is four things. It's obsessing over customers, not competitors, thinking long-term, longer term than most companies think. It's a willingness to invent and then a corresponding willingness to fail. And then finally, professional pride and operational excellence. That's sort of the mentality of Amazon. And then the set of repeatable processes that they've developed are things we outline in the book, but basically what they've come up with are processes that any company can use for how do you hire people? How do you make decisions in meetings? How do you develop new products? How do you think about organizing your teams? And how do you manage your metrics to be focused on customers and inputs? So we describe these. What we're hoping is that if one company rises up, having read our book, adopts and implements many of the great things that we learned at Amazon and uses that to propel themselves to great success, then we feel like we will have done our job.
People will have to go read this part, but the idea of avoiding PowerPoints and long, boring meetings and whatnot, and your unique process for that, that's worth the cost of admission, because I don't think anybody ever feels like long PowerPoints ever do anything, right? One big last thought that I have, for me, and as an outsider looking in, it seems to be a huge part of the success. But for any business owner, new business, et cetera, once you get that captive, loyal audience and you do good for them, they're willing to consider you to do something else good for them. And that seems to be a lot of what Amazon has done. I mentioned this earlier, okay? They deliver books to me easy. Okay, I'll think about these other things. This is easy. It's a natural extension. But that captive, loyal audience, getting people that love what you do. And I'm not really sure that back in the early days, I didn't get a book from Amazon and go, oh my gosh, I love Amazon. You just got the book. You didn't really, there wasn't like a love thing. Still don't think today people go, I love Amazon. It's just very efficient. It does what it says it's going to do, and it makes life more interesting and easier, etc.
Yes. Earning that customer's trust is really hard to do, and losing it is really easy. You can make one little mistake. You ship some item late, you don't ship it, you overcharge them, you name it. Customer trust is so easily lost. One of the ways that Amazon solved that, which most companies, this goes back to the delayed gratification thing. One of the most unpleasant things for anyone to do is to look at things that are not working well in your company and actually seek them out and then spend time in meetings going over them. Who would want to do that? Well, that is exactly what Amazon does. They literally look for defects in the customer experience and then have meetings to review, okay, how do we programmatically fix this defect so it never happens again? And you do it over and over and over again, because guess what? If you're running a complex e-commerce business that's 24/7 and global, carrying millions of different products, trust me, there'll be plenty of problems and defects. What Amazon did is they actually sought them out and fixed them in all kinds of magical ways. Like a simple example, Prime Video around 2011, when we were just getting going with streaming technology and it was nascent, we knew that a lot of our customers were having rebuffer events. Partly we knew because we would hear about it a lot from our customer support team. So what we decided to do was actually build out the technology to monitor every single customer's stream of a movie or a TV show. And if they had more than 2 or 3 rebuffers, and if it was a movie rental, we would automatically refund their money. No questions asked. They didn't even have to contact CS, just because we knew they'd had a bad experience. And we knew that the cost long-term, the $3 or $4 that would cost us to refund their money was a great investment for maintaining that customer's trust and loyalty over the long term. But many companies don't do these simple things.
Let me share with you really quickly. This podcast has been online for like 8 years. I've talked to everybody under the sun. Starting off, it was just easy to do Skype audio. But recently, I've been doing more Zoom conversations. And as we were setting this conversation up, the person helping us set it up said, well, Bill prefers to not be on Skype. And as we're having this buffering conversation, I'm like, if you work with Skype, anyone listening, you guys need to listen about this buffering issue, because there's absolutely no reason at Mr. Microsoft that Skype should be having buffering issues in 2021.
Yeah, no kidding.
I'm sure that was the exact reason why you said I would prefer to be using Zoom.
I just haven't used Skype. I haven't used it in a while. I wouldn't know how to use it anymore.
You've made the pivot, and I'm probably pivoting with you. There's a great example right there that there's absolutely no reason except somebody not paying attention that Zoom took over in 2020.
Yeah, I'm certainly not an expert in that space, but I've certainly scratched my head and say, well, wait a minute, why isn't Skype still the leader? What happened there? I thought they were the company that did this, but the answer probably is that they didn't continue to sort of think about what other customer needs they could develop the product for and expand that out, and Zoom did.
The world moves fast. If you're sitting still, something's going to change, right?
Yes.
The book, Working Backwards, Insight Stories and Secrets from Inside Amazon. Bill, thank you. Very cool stuff. I hope you're okay with not going down a bullet point dig through of the book, because I really thought some of the war stories and insights were great. People will love that stuff, and people should definitely go in and check out some of the nitty gritty. For example, why I mentioned that Amazon is not into PowerPoint presentations. That kind of stuff is worth its weight in gold as well.
Appreciate it, Michael. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, sir. Hey, is there a place you want to send people, or can we direct people to?
Sure. Visit our website. It's www.workingbackwards.com, and you can learn more about the book and more about me and my co-author, Colin.
Bill, cool stuff. If there's ever a second book, please let me know.
Will do.
Hey, thanks, sir.
Thank you, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.